You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now. The Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Time's on my mind when I had you by my side. Am I thinking loud? Do I want you around? Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. My name's Joseph Toscano. If you wonder what anarchy is all about, anarchos without rulers. It's about creating a society without rulers. Not without rules, without rulers. What gives rulers the ability to determine the fate of tens of thousands, as we see every day? Inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggle is the struggle to devolve power. That's shared power, possibly through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Exceptionally conservative ideas. Nothing radical about them. Very conservative, very simple. You don't need a PhD or a doctorate in philosophy or whatever to understand what the anarchist struggle is all about. It's very simple. Anarchos without rulers. Not without rules, without rulers. You see, those who exercise authority believe that left to their own devices, because we are touched with original sin, we will just rape and kill each other. They forget that the biggest killers on the planet, as we see today, and we see every day, are those who exercise power and concentrate power. And the fewer hands power is concentrated in, the greater the damage that is caused. That is the history of the human race. All right, sounds a bit like a sermon, doesn't it? The anarchist sermon on the mountain. Now, I'm interested in looking at something, and I may spend some time on it this morning, on the hidden cost of Australians of corporate welfare. That's right, the hidden cost to you, your family, your friends, your workmates, if you're working. So if you're working, I don't know why you're listening to this today. You should be working. I'll tell the boss. Now, the hidden cost to Australians of corporate welfare. You think, corporate welfare? We don't have corporate welfare. We have a welfare system. Ugh, boys and girls. Wash out your mouth with soap and water. We don't have a welfare system for the citizens of this country and permanent residents. We have a social security system. And it's a very simple equation. You don't rock the boat, we give you enough to exist in terms of old age pensions, disability pensions, unemployment benefits, and the list goes on and on. It's not welfare. It's a social security system which was designed to maintain peace in society and avert the possibility of rioting and even possible revolution. That's what a social security system is about. But we do have welfare. We do have welfare in this country, and it's corporate welfare. And that has a profound impact on each and every one of us. And in the discussions, erudite analysis that you hear every day, that you look at, that you see on social media, that you see in the legacy media, radio, television, you name it, TikTok, he talks about the hidden cost of corporate welfare. Most people don't even know corporate welfare exists, because corporate welfare is one of the biggest industries in this country. And what I'm going to try to do today, and the key word is try, because it's not a complex issue, it's a very simple issue. And it's those who have more get more, and those who have less get less. Simple issue. But the thing is, we've got to look at the way it's structured for us to understand why in this country 1 million children living in poverty, why in this country we have a housing crisis. You know, when you think about it, there are 8 billion people on the planet. There's only 26 million people living on a continent the size of Australia. You would think, you know, if you had a half a brain, or one synapse in neuro, not even half a brain, you would think that we wouldn't need private charities, and there's 32,000 registered private charities, to raise public money in order to address the shortcomings of government in our society. So why do we find ourselves in this situation? So what is corporate welfare, and how does it affect each and every one of us? Well, let's go through the obvious examples of corporate welfare. Private education. Now, I've got no hassles with you if you want to send your kiddies to a private school, but take your hand out of the public pocket, out of the public purse. Stop stealing public money to support private education. Billions of dollars every year, not millions, billions of dollars every year go into privately owned education facilities, and most of these are large corporations, some for-profits, most not-for-profit, in order to educate. You like that word? Educate. You know, these kiddies. Now, if you want to send your kid to a private school, fine, but fund it yourself. Fund it yourself. That's corporate welfare. The fact is that we have private charities raising money to send Australian kids to Australian public schools. Well, we have billions of dollars of taxpayers' funds going to private schools, which in the majority of cases are well catered for. That's a hidden cost. Let's look at another hidden cost of corporate welfare. The health insurance industry. Now, in this country, if you've got private health insurance. Now, once again, I have no issues if people want to buy private health insurance. But why do we need to put billions of dollars, 8 to 12 billions a year, to subsidise a private health insurance industry which only provides services to about 43% of the population, and at the very best only cherry picks the more profitable and easy cases? If you want a private health system, go ahead, but pay it yourself. It's very simple. That is corporate welfare. Let's move on. What is corporate welfare? When you got another example, the aged care sector. Now, the aged care sector, although it's been privatised, thank you, Johnny, and I'll speak about this later on. Although it's been privatised, it relies heavily, very heavily, on public funding. Now, the key in a private aged care facility, which is privately owned, whether by a hedge fund, whether it's listed on the stock exchange or by individuals, the fact is that care is heavily funded by the taxpayer. Why do we need a third party who takes up billions of dollars providing aged care? That's corporate welfare. That is corporate welfare. Now, these are examples of direct corporate welfare. Diesel rebate, where large mining corporations receive a direct contribution from the Australian taxpayer, right, for using diesel fuel. Another example of corporate welfare, and we don't think about it as corporate welfare, negative gearing. Negative gearing is nothing more than corporate welfare. If you've got the disposable income to buy a second or a third home, you can actually get a tax advantage. So while people struggle to put a roof over their head, we have a small section of the Australian population, about 8%, who have the disposable income to pay for a second home, who profit from this country's negative gearing laws. That is another form of corporate welfare. If you look at the stock market and people who have shares in the stock market, once again we have corporate welfare, which runs into billions of dollars every year, where we subsidise their investments. And not everybody outside of your superannuation fund invests in the stock market or has the disposable income to directly invest in the stock market. That's another example of corporate welfare. Another example of corporate welfare is the legislation which we have in place. Look at the taxation revenue. We still have 65%, between 60 and 67% of taxation revenue which comes directly from pay-as-you-earn taxpayers, directly from their pockets, pay-as-you-earn taxpayers. While the corporate taxation take is between 20 and 25%, and excise duties make up the rest. Now that is corporate welfare. When you have 1/3 of profitable companies not paying any tax because of this country's taxation laws, which ensure that the more assets you have, the bigger the profits you make, the less you're expected to contribute to the Australian economy, while at the same time we provide the infrastructure which allows these corporations to maximise their profits. Roads, security via the police force, the armed forces. This is just another form of corporate welfare. And I could go on, and I will, because corporate welfare exists in many, many dimensions. And a prime example is the mining industry, where theoretically anything under, I think it's about a foot under the freehold title you own, belongs to the Crown. But what the Crown has done, and the Crown basically is the Australian government, it has, for a peppercorn rent, allowed private mining companies, which only employ 2% of the Australian population, it has allowed them to make extraordinary profits at the expense of each of us and to create billionaires into the bargain. Extraordinary. As I spoke about last week, Mr. Dutton, Gina Rinehart's latest political toy boy, poor old Barnaby Joyce, has kind of disgraced himself. He's no longer at the forefront of Gina's political love affair. So corporate welfare exists in many, many ways. It is central to the type of society we have. Although we are told, and we do, vote to elect our representatives, most of our representatives belong to political parties. Not independents, but they belong to political parties. These political parties rely on watering down policies in order to be elected or re-elected. Because if they start talking about introducing real change, we have every Tom, Dick and Harry in the privately owned communications industry jumping up and down about how unfair it all is. I remember when there was some minor changes to superannuation, we were expected to cry crocodile tears for people with over $3 million in their superannuation account because they may have to fork a little bit more to the public. So corporate welfare is at the very heart. We cannot continue ad infinitum to provide public resources which come through the blood, sweat and tears of ordinary workers in 2/3 of cases, as far as excise is as far as taxation revenue is concerned. We can't continue this and provide for the basic necessities for this country's population. Extraordinary. 32,000 registered charities. 32,000. Now, I've got nothing against the registered charities. Obviously, they're trying to fill gaps in the legislative agenda, but these gaps are created through the amount of public resources, whether it's directly or indirectly through legislation, which allow the corporate sector, which in this country dominates almost every aspect of our existence, because we don't have antitrust laws, we can allow them to grow to 80-90% of the market, as we see with the hardware industry. But the thing is, as long as we allow this, as long as we don't understand that the situation a significant proportion of this country's population finds themselves in is directly related to the amount of public money which goes to private sources. For example, early childhood education. Again, another form of corporate welfare. Instead of providing facilities which are government-owned or which are community-owned to provide early childhood education, we allow the private sector, and in the majority of cases 3, 4, 5 large corporations, dominate that sector. And once that happens, they have a superhighway to the Australian Treasury. That's corporate welfare. Because we've been seduced with the idea that it's only the private sector that can actually do the right job. They're the only ones. Nobody else can do anything. Well, think about it. Think about your life. Think about the situation you find yourself in. Think about why you find yourself in that situation. Think about the contribution that corporate welfare has to that growing inequality in society. Think about it. For example, simple. We've had inflation. We've had increased interest rates. We've had increased company profits. Does it make sense? You've got inflation, increased interest rates, but you've got increased company profits. Obviously, they're price gouging. That's the way it works. Corporate welfare. Corporate welfare. It is a cancer. It is a cancer which is metastasised through Australian society. We've reached stage 4. That's right, stage 4 metastases, corporate welfare. It is the noose around our necks, and if we continue to ignore this cancer, it will destroy us as a society and a people, because irrespective of the number of private charities that are established, they can never fill the gap that's necessary to ensure that all Australians have access to the basic necessities of life. This is the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. Go to 3cr.org.au. My name's Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program of the Anarchist World This Week. It's interesting, isn't it? Palestinian history is irrelevant. It's a little bit like black history in this country. It's irrelevant. I mean, everything started on the 7th of October, didn't it? 2023. It all started on the 7th of October. You got these vicious, evil terrorists run out of the country, the Earth's biggest prison, Gaza, and killed people in southern Israel, 1,200 of them. And now, in response, we have mass murder and famine. It's all in a day's work for the Israeli military authorities. But see, this is the problem. This is the problem with living in the 21st century. Right in front of us, we have unfolding a humanitarian disaster of unparalleled proportions. But there's only one problem. It's not created by the Russians. It's not created by the Chinese. It's not created by the North Koreans or any other enemy we can point our finger at. It's created by one of our major allies, not but the country's major allies, the State of Israel. And you see, Palestinian history is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. The previous 70 years are irrelevant. The humiliation is irrelevant. The fact that Gaza was nothing more than a glorified prison since 2016, when the people of Gaza elected Hamas as their government. I hate to use the word elected, because they did. And a blockade was inserted around Gaza. You begin to understand that if you look at history, then you find reasons. But remember, it's irrelevant. It's inconsequential. It doesn't matter what happens to the Palestinians or what's happened to them for the previous 70 years. It's just irrelevant. And that's the beauty of 21st century society. Everything that happened yesterday is irrelevant. There is no connection. We find no connection between events. It's about atrocity after atrocity. And if there's no atrocity, we create it. History is irrelevant. Unfortunately, history is exceptionally relevant. History is about his story, her story. It's about the steps that lead to a particular situation. And if you don't understand that history, you'll never make sense of the world. And you'll be cheering on the sidelines, for the good guys, whoever the good guys are for that particular day. And it gets worse. Now, when the Israeli government stated that I think it was 8 or 9 Palestinians were involved in the 7th attack on southern Israel, which led to the death of 1,200 people, the Australian government, as well as a whole host of governments, suspended aid to the United Nations. That means suspended aid to the major aid facility in Gaza. And while Sweden and Canada have reinstated that aid, the Australian government still sits on its fingers. You know what the Australian government did on your behalf? It asked the Israeli government to provide evidence. Guess what? The check's still in the mail. That evidence haven't arrived. So the Australian government, despite the carnage that's occurring, it's not a war. I mean, a war is when both sides have, at least have some armaments. Ukraine and Russia, that's a war. That's a war. But Gaza, that is not a war, that is carnage. Almost 31,000 people dead, as I said. Go on that little 31-kilometre walk today and just look at all the bodies that are lined up. And at least 40% will be children. That's not a war, that's carnage. When one side has tanks and planes and drones and missiles and ships and can blockade, 2 million people and force them into starvation, that's not a war. That is carnage. That is collective punishment. It's a little bit like, let's say our government, the Australian government, did something particularly horrendous. And the opposing force then attacked us and collectively punished us for the result of that government policy. And that's what we're seeing. Famine, mass murder, war crimes, indiscriminate destruction in an area about 40% the size of Melbourne, and we call it a war. And we sit on the sidelines and we wait. What are we waiting for? And the lunacy of the United States having endured air dropping, 10, 20,000 meals a day by air, and now actually setting up a temporary port in Gaza. The lunacy, when all that needs to happen is the 2 checkpoints to be open to allow the aid which is massed outside to go into Gaza to prevent famine. It's total lunacy. But the lunacy is because it's our people who are involved in these war crimes, involved in this mass murder, involved in this total overreaction, because it's our people, our allies, we're quite happy to sit on the sidelines and wait and wait and wait until it's too late. You're listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. If you're interested in following up some of these ideas, you can go to Public Interest Before Corporate Interests YouTube channel, PIBCI, PIBCI.net. You can go to, if you're interested in Australian history, you can go to josephtoscano.narm, N-A-R-M. That's another YouTube channel. Other websites you can go to, anarchistmedia.org. Facebook pages, Defend and Extend Public Housing Everybody's Business, Joseph Toscano for PIBCI, and the list goes on and on. So there's a lot of information there on the World Wide Web, but ultimately what happens, as we see in Gaza, is what actually happens on the ground, is what has a profound impact. Click activism, it's not very good for your repetitive strain injury, but ultimately it almost seems to be a total waste of time. Let's move on. I mean, a simple thing the Australian government could do to say that this is unacceptable: recall the Australian ambassador from Israel. If every government recalled their ambassadors from Israel, not everybody has ambassadors in Israel, and made them the Israeli state the pariah it has become through its behaviour, then maybe the citizens of Israel would begin to understand that what the Israeli government, their government, is doing in Gaza is the very best recruitment strategy for Hamas. Let's move on. West Papua. Just like to remind you that I'm the convener of the West Papuan Rent Collective. The West Papuan Rent Collective was established in 2015. What's that? That's 8 years ago. 9 years ago. It's 2024 now. How could I get my figures wrong? The West Papuan Rent Collective was established to raise enough money to pay the rent for an office in Melbourne for the West Papuan independence movement so they could conduct their struggle in the way they saw fit. The West Papuan Rent Collective's role is not to tell the West Papuans how to conduct their independence struggle. It's about providing the space which allows them to conduct their independence struggle. The office has become important in the West Papuan national campaign to achieve independence, an international campaign. It's become an exceptionally important focus for that struggle. And the West Papuan Rent Collective, like all voluntary organisations, sometimes has issues paying the rent. Now, 3 times a year we hold a West Papuan Rent Collective gathering, so you can come and look at the office, hear some of the speakers, see what the West Papuan independence struggle is about, have a lunch, meet some of the activists, and hopefully encourage you to become a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective. A membership is very simple, $1 a day. What's that, 1/5 of a cup of coffee a day if you buy your coffee outside? It's around $5 these days, I understand. Maybe $4.50, $2 if you go to a self-service station. But seriously, the next West Papuan Rent Collective is on the 14th of April, Sunday the 14th of April. It'll be held downstairs at the West Papuan office, 838 Collins Street, Docklands. 838 Collins Street, Docklands. Just walk round the back. There's a barbecue facility. There's a community garden. There is office. There is space there for the gathering, and you're all welcome. You don't have to tell anybody. Just turn up. And if you are interested in becoming a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective, and usually by this time of year we find ourselves sitting on our haunches trying to collect the rent, you can give me a ring on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489, or you can contact the West Papuan office directly. But just come along, see what's going on the 14th of April. I'll have more details as we get closer to the day. Yes, and I will be conducting the West Papuan auction once again to try to raise money for the Rent Collective. And we'd like to thank the furniture maker, well-known Victorian furniture maker, David McKenzie, for donating 3 small tables which he's made to be auctioned on the day. So if you've got something that you've made, well, and you want it to be part of the auction, let us know, and we'll try to make some money out of it. Unfortunately, you won't get a cent. It all goes to the West Papuan Rent Collective. Let's move on to something more esoteric, but becoming more and more important. Now, I don't know if you've noticed the amount of sovereign nation states and private companies that are racing to get to the moon. Yep, little old moon. Supposed to be full of minerals and good things which we can exploit. We've now colonised planet Earth to an inch of its existence, and now is the time to colonise space. Yes, the human animal is on his hind feet, and we're jumping into space exploration in a big, big way. Although the United States is the only sovereign nation state that's actually landed people on the moon, I think that was in 1969. I could be wrong with that date. The fact is there's a lot of countries, a lot of sovereign nation states, and more importantly, private organisations that are very keen to get to the moon, to exploit all those mineral resources. And with artificial intelligence and robotics, it could be that you don't even need any people up there to exploit all those mineral resources. So there is a very important question we, as citizens of planet Earth, not as citizens of some pathetic little sovereign nation state on the surface of planet Earth, but as citizens of planet Earth, each and every one of us, 8 billion inhabiting Earth. So what are we going to do? Is the moon going to become a battleground for sovereign nation states, which will plant their little enclave and mine what they can get to make a buck? Or will the moon become private property for private corporations which are investing billions in an effort to get to the moon to claim little bits of it or large bits of it for their own shareholders? Will the moon be a global commons? What does a global commons mean? It means it belongs to each and every one of us. It's a commons. And that any profitability from exploiting the moon is shared by the planet Earth, not by sovereign nation states or private, or becomes private property for some transnational or international or space national corporation. It's something we should think about. Because the moon today, Mars tomorrow, the stars the day after. Now, we saw what happened when the colonisation occurred in the 16th, 17th and 18th and even the 19th century. We saw the profound impact it had on First Nations people, including people in this continent, how what was common land became private property, or the property of a sovereign nation state, which then doled out that land to private interests. And we saw the effects of colonisation, not just on the First Nations people, but on the environment, and how the environment has been manipulated to such a degree that we now face a climate emergency. Not just individual sovereign nation states, but each and every one of us on planet Earth. And if you think the idea of a global commons is unachievable, think of the Antarctic. Now, I know there are moves that in 2046, the current Antarctic Treaty will disappear, and some countries, including the Chinese government, is biting at the bit to start exploiting resources in Antarctica. The fact is, because of the agreement in 1967, Antarctica is a commons. It's common ground, where different sovereign nation states are actually able to set up bases, but not claim it as their sovereign property. And the difference between the Antarctic and the rest of planet Earth is there were no people in the Antarctic. There were in the Arctic, but not in the Antarctic. The same as the moon, global commons. The thing is about a lot of ideas is you just can't leave it to the last minute. If you leave it to the last minute, you've lost the battle. Now is the time to raise this issue, not just in private conversations, but in public conversations. Does the Australian government have a policy on this? Do they support the concept of sovereign nation states colonising the moon and fighting amongst themselves, for exclusive rights to certain sections of the moon, as we saw on planet Earth? Or do we allow private corporations, as in the Wild West, to dominate this exploratory phase? Now, no private corporation is going to spend billions of dollars trying to get people to the moon if it doesn't expect a return for its investment, because that's the whole purpose of capitalism, private investment for private profit. So obviously, the fact that private corporations are now heavily involved, some in cooperation with sovereign nation states like the United States, in trying to get established bases on the moon, obviously they're going to expect something in return. Or should the moon, like the Antarctic currently is, be a global commons where any resource exploitation, if we decide to exploit it, which there's been no exploitation of resources in Antarctica as far as I'm aware, it's a global commons. These are the type of issues that should be debated in the United Nations and should be debated around the planet. And while the tragedy of Gaza continues, these types of issues will never be heard. All right, let's move on. You listen to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Now, just a short thing. Australian manufacturing, dead as a dodo. Well, it was supposed to be resurrected. Now, I understand the government in its largesse is removing tariffs from a range of goods. I think it's about 500 goods. And guess what? They expect the private sector to pass on these savings to the consumer. And I expect pigs to fly and God to turn up here at the studio. Come on. I mean, there's just another nail in Australian manufacturing. Many of these tariffs were placed to protect Australian manufacturing from unequal competition. I know we all love our cheap T-shirts, which we can then throw away, and we don't even have to wash them. We can send them to Africa where they got huge piles of used clothing from the West, which is of no use to anybody. But the fact is, removing of these tariffs, you're not going to see a flow on to the Australian people of reduced prices. It's just another nail in the coffin of Australian manufacturing. All right, let's move on to the big issue, because, now that I'm a septuagenarian, the big issue, aged care. Now, there's always been private aged care, but the difference was that it didn't dominate the aged care sector. In 1997, the People's Friend, the former Prime Minister, Johnny Howard, to his mates, and Howard, whatever, to his non-mates, was having little chats about privatising the aged care industry, because obviously and I know the private sector always does it better than the public sector and the community sector, because there's the public sector and there's the community sector. The private sector always does it better. We know that. We know that when we privatised energy production facilities, prices went down, didn't they? Yeah. And when we privatised, telecom, prices went down, didn't they? Yeah. And when we privatised the country's airports, prices went down, didn't they? Yeah. Well, we know how good the private sector is. Well, our friends in the private sector said, Johnny, we can't make a buck from these old bastards because they get too much care. We need you to remove the ratio, the need for nursing staff in aged care facilities, because if we've got to pay for qualified nursing staff, we won't be able to make enough of a profit. And you need to do a few other things just to ensure that we can make a buck out of this. What's the point of being involved in a private investment for private profit society if we can't make a buck out of the old bastards, And we can see it as a great opportunity because 1997 is 1997, but in 20 to 30 years' time there'll be plenty of those old bastards around the place, people like me they were talking about, septuagenarians, octogenarians, nanogenarians, and many of them are going to need care. You like that? They're going to need care, but we need to make a buck, and we can't make a buck by reducing their food allocation to $3 a day. We need to make a real buck out of this, or our shareholders were going to put their money in gold or negative gearing or, diamonds or iron ore, or they're going to help Gina out. They're not going to bother buying shares in our company to look after old bastards if we can't make a decent profit. So it all changed. So it all chuffled on, and we had a Royal Commission 2 years ago, and the Royal Commission was aghast at how pathetic the situation was in the aged care sector. Then the government stepped in and said the aged care workers needed a rise because their wages were so low, but the aged care facility owners said, no, we can't pay the bastards. So what happened is we, the taxpayer, paid for the wage increase and continue to pay for the wage increase. Another form of corporate welfare, Why not help the private sector by actually paying their employees, okay? Now we've had an inquiry because the Royal Commission was aghast. It could not believe the atrocities that were being committed in the aged care sector. It could not believe how bad things were for residents and staff. Just could not believe it. If you really want to read something that brings tears to your eyes, read the Royal Commission report into the aged care facilities. And if you haven't got time, read the bloody summary. All right? So the government said, wow, this is not good. I'm not talking about the Morrison-led government. They didn't give a shit about aged care. Let's forget that. The Albanese-led Labor government said, this is not good. Let's have an inquiry. Let's see what we can do. And guess what? Who was appointed to the inquiry? Who was appointed to the inquiry? The aged care providers. The same recipients of corporate welfare were the agents of the report, which has just been released in the last 48 hours. And what did they find? Surprise, surprise, that people in aged care need to pay more. The government shouldn't introduce a levy, like the Medicare levy. The more you earn, the more you pay. That's what the Medicare levy is all about. It's a percentage of income. It's a tax based on percentage of income. No levy for aged care. We don't want a levy. What we want is those recipients to pay, and if they can't pay, we want the government to pay on their behalf so we can continue to make ever-increasing profits for our shrinking number of shareholders, because this is a great industry, you know. If you on social media or watch the legacy media, watch TV, listen to radio, all those wonderful ads, have you noticed, for people like you and me, all those septos and octos out there and nanos, all those wonderful retirement homes, those villages where you can play bridge to your heart's content and grow a tomato in 1 metre of soil, you know, and how wonderful it is and how it's a new life. Unbelievable. You see, the thing about life in Australia, it's very simple. If you're unethical, immoral, and love the private investment for private profit mantra, and it's the mantra that drives you every day, well, you're going to make lots of money, especially with all the corporate welfare about. And that means when you get old, you become a septo or an octo or a nano, you're not going to need their aged care. You'll have your own. You're not going to need. But the majority of us will find ourselves in that situation. Not everybody who's old ends up in aged care, only about 15% do. But many older people need support in their own homes, which in many regards, well, in most regards, is provided by the government of the day. So what's wrong with a levy? Well, the government is concerned that if we're going to introduce a new tax, the corporate-owned media is going to go bananas about it. Well, there is a way around it. Why not introduce a 5% levy on every corporation in the country, and a 10% levy for the mining sector to fund aged care? Why not? Why not? Why not redistribute that wealth which they have been allowed to pocket because of our weak legislative agenda as far as taxation is concerned in this country? And that's the dilemma. That's the dilemma we face every day. I mean, I could put out billions of ideas. Another idea would be a 1% transaction tax. Would fund aged care. Wouldn't take long to fund it, fully fund it. But the problem is we have vested interests in this country. Vested interests. And they are interested in continuing the situation we find ourselves in. They love corporate welfare. They're addicted to corporate welfare. It is part of their business model. And until we as a people are able to think beyond the fact that we need radical change as far as corporate welfare is concerned, well, nothing will change. And the individual, irrespective of the income they have, will be expected to carry the can. That's the message for the private investment for private profit, scams society's involved in today. Aged care, early childhood development, roads, infrastructure, healthcare, education, you name it. Corporate welfare, the single most important hurdle we face in this country to ensure that each and every one of us shares in the Commonwealth. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. My name's Joseph Toscano. You can write to me. Yes, I love letters. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. You can email me at anarchistage@yahoo.com or info@pibci.net. You can leave pleasant phone messages on 0439 395 489. That's right. I encourage you to listen to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network next week. To all our listeners in every corner of this vast continent, thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week. Hopefully you'll get up from your seat, you'll walk outside, you look at the rain, the sunshine, the wind, and decide that you are going to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving.
On public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
Just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps. Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now, the Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.